Francis Hurd is covering that summit for us. Francis, good afternoon. Has the news of the signing of this bill been a topic there? More specifically, has the Finance Minister spoken about it?
The Finance Minister has been questioned about this, and I must say, according to what I've seen, not by foreign journalists, but by South African journalists. So the news breaking in South Africa, and he is being asked about it here in Davos. And what he's saying, just to put this into context, Devon, there was a lot of controversy when government refused to re-sign a lot of investment contracts with various. You can see snow falling behind me. I'm just checking we're okay. We've just hit a camera person there. This is Davos for you. So the context is that government signed various investment contracts protecting foreign investors. So if they put their money into South Africa and government changes its mind in any sense, they have recourse. Government did not re-sign those, and at the time, Rob Davies was saying we don't need that because foreign investors are protected by our constitution and by our courts. I think part of the problem here is that government hasn't been consistent because now it has, in fact, signed a new law into being in December. Some concerns about that because of the security provision where foreign investors have to give over the majority of ownership to South Africans. So it is being talked about. Gordon saying that this is standard. A lot of countries protect themselves through these sorts of agreements, and maybe it's been overblown because it's just one or two clauses that are problematic.
Now, Francis, you've spoken to the Finance Minister just hours ago. What is he saying about the cost and effort to Davos? Is it worth it?
Well, we know that the rand is 30% down from Davos last year. This trip has become more expensive, so there's been a lot of talk about this huge South African delegation. Is it worth it? 80 people. But he has clarified that government doesn't pay mostly, for the most part, registration fees, which are about, if you can believe, R500,000 rand a person. So he's saying that companies themselves, because this delegation includes the private sector and government, they cover that cost, and government excluded from that. Still, we have at least 4 ministers here, quite a big government delegation. Just staying in Davos is expensive. He says it is worth it. Here's what he had to tell us last night at a South African event.
You've got to match it against the benefits of being here. And that is that we need to understand, A, the global environment, which we all know from the numbers is not a nice place at the moment, and one which is showing increasingly that the kind of turbulence we're experiencing in the financial markets is not going to end too soon, but secondly, it's having an impact on real economies in the world. The second is to hope to influence the negative narrative against the emerging markets, because the world needs to be reminded that it's the big emerging markets that engaged in huge fiscal stimuli between 2009 and a few years later. We in South Africa borrowed probably R1 trillion in that time in order that we wouldn't cut any basic services to South Africans, and we had the space to borrow. Our debt to GDP was 25% at that time, and now slowly rising to 50%, and we want to level it off, ideally, at that level, but we'll talk about that on budget day. So, and the third is to understand, together with other commodity-producing countries, what the low demand and low prices is doing to disrupt economies. So, for example, in many African countries, there's a huge dependence on oil revenue and other commodity revenue. And once that revenue is cut by half, then you have difficulties of adjusting to the new environment. And then lastly, to explain that basically South Africa is still a good place. It's got lots of strengths. Many companies are seeing those strengths. We need to have many more companies that see those strengths, both within South Africa and in the globe. And I think this has been a very useful unifying process, trying to develop a common view between particularly South African business and government, but on the other hand, we need to also have those engagements with labor. And when we get back, we've got to start addressing some of the internal challenges as well.
How do you change the narrative? Because I've been hearing South Africa come up, but like you say, it's in the context of those emerging markets and the woes, the labour organisations saying that jobs will be lost in countries like South Africa. That's the last thing we need. How do you change perceptions, especially because are we doing anything different? Are we offering anything tangibly different from the past?
Well, no. When you have the very advanced kind of business infrastructure we have, financial system, JSE, legal and auditing skills, they're all listed on the WEF competitiveness index, then we do have something to sell. And we often forget in our own negativity about ourselves that we have good things going for us. Secondly, we can demonstrate to anybody in the world that when we've made commitments in terms of fiscal management in South Africa, we've kept to those commitments. And we will continue to do so, as we've said a few weeks ago. And there shouldn't be any doubt about that. Thirdly, South Africans are fairly frank about their own challenges as well. And some of them are legacy-based, some of them are contemporary, and some of them are structural. So how do we get the skills level up in the context of the fourth industrial revolution? Because what the ILO is saying is that there's going to be an increasing gap between the less skilled and the more skilled. So while there are pluses in health, in education, in e-commerce, in small businesses reaching out to new markets, there's the flip side of the coin as well, that increasing use of technology to increase productivity and competitiveness reaches a negative point at some stage in terms of the social cost of these things as well. So we need to use the advantages and begin with the rest of the world to prepare for some of the disadvantages. So how do you change the narrative? Well, inspire more confidence amongst ourselves, believe in ourselves that we can do things differently.